Hello and welcome to a lecture on Period 1 of AP US History. This lecture is focusing on the first part of Key Concept 1.2. So there's Key Concept 1.2, which is contact and contact leading to change on both sides. And we're looking at Part 1, which is looking at the changes in Europe that contact came from. And this is a painting of the King and Queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, welcoming Christopher Columbus back. So part A of this is the 3Gs, and you might have seen the 3Gs before in a previous course of why the Europeans were exploring and colonizing, what was their motivation, the 3Gs of gold, glory, and God, and we see that in the AP's language here from their concept outline. European nations' efforts to explore and conquer the New World came from search for new sources of wealth or gold, economic and military competition, the glory, and a desire to spread Christianity, the God part of it. Okay, so why did they explore? How were they able to do it? And we'll expand upon these, but it's the Crusades and trade, the Renaissance, technology, consolidation of Spain, and the Protestant Reformation. So each of these is contributing to why they explored and seeking new lands, or how they were able to do it. So here we have the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal today. And so we'll start here with the consolidation of Spain, which occurred in the late 1400s. And to understand the significance of this event and what happened under United Spain, you must consider the context. Nobody would have predicted the remarkable success that Spain was about to have, and then the rest of Western Europe that was also going to happen. The Europeans in the 1400s are on the edge of commerce and innovation and power. Commerce was in the Indian Ocean and along the Silk Road, and trade was within Asia. Europeans in the 1400s were constantly fighting each other, and it only recently recovered from the Black Death. Their leadership, the religious leadership, the Christian church, prevented any true new understandings of the world, insisting that everything worth knowing was already known. And the Europeans were the weak ones, and the Muslim world was encroaching on them. So this part of the Iberian Peninsula, Granada, was under the control of Muslims that have been coming up through North Africa. And, we see it divided into kingdoms. Divided you fall, divided you're weak. So the marriage between King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella here, and then them uniting Spain and driving out the Muslims from Spain and expelling or converting the Spanish Jews, it created a deeply religious, militant, expansionistic nation, strong nation, loyal to the Pope and devoted to the expansion of Christianity. They had the wealth, they had the desire to fund expensive and risky adventures such as Columbus's. And they had the technology was available, and the caravels, shipping, light ships that can travel very well on the winds, and better navigation tools, map-making tools, so that you know where you are. And don't dismiss the printing press as well, which greatly expanded Europeans' interest in Asia through popular travel tales such as Marco Polo's. So the East, China and India and the Ottoman Empire, they were mysteriously enticing and exotic and appeared to be incalculably rich. And so it's using this technology. What they wanted was another route to Asia, which brings us to this map. So Europe is here, right, and Spain on sort of the edge of it, and this orangey brownish color is what they knew at the time. So they know of Asia, and they know of this African coast, but the rest of the world is a mystery to them. And over here in India, China, Arabia, the Ottoman Empire, that's the world of trade. As I said, this is the commerce, the innovation, the scientific advancement, the power is here in Asia, and the trade is happening here in the Indian Ocean or here along the Silk Road. And for the Europeans, they're cut off from this by the Ottomans. And the Ottomans were getting rich, acting as middlemen between India and China further east and the Europeans to their west. And it was through only some of the Europeans, particularly the Italians in Venice, the Venetians, that had access doing trade with the Ottomans here. And for the other Europeans, then they have to go through their middlemen, the Venetians, and so they're getting cut out. And if only they could gain direct access to the markets of Asia and cut out the Italian middlemen and the Ottoman middlemen, then perhaps they could get fabulously wealthy. But how? Well, find another way. And that's what the Portuguese did under the sailings of Gama and Diaz, and they found a way here. And what Columbus proposed was trying west. Let's go this way. And he's looking for someone who's able to finance this expedition, and Ferdinand and Isabella said, okay. And Columbus made a terrible mistake. He miscalculated the size of the earth. Had he not gotten extremely lucky by discovering new lands, he and his crew would have died from a lack of fresh water. So their main goal here, the main thing to understand what's motivating them, is access to trade through Asia, and to cut out the middlemen, here. They want to cut these people out and get direct access to the trade. So Columbus, well, he didn't die, and instead he discovered these new lands here, and other Europeans then followed, and exploration and competition over the Americas has begun in 1492. is when this begins. And you do not need to know all the explorers or the routes, but Cabot and Cartier are significant as well up here. And sailing for the English and for the French, and the competition between these three was quite fierce, each wanting that glory, gold, and God, and to have dominion and sovereignty over the Americas and the people there. And later, the Protestant Reformation would intensify the competition as well, dividing Europe into two camps, Protestant and Catholic, and both competing to have domination. So there's the contact and the why and the how behind it, which leads then to the change for Europeans, which is what Part B is getting at here. And the big things, food and mineral wealth, gold and silver. So the Columbian Exchange, you can pause to have a look at this. This is from American Pageant. I just want to quickly pause and correct some wording. I do not like New World, Old World. It's the Americas and Eurasia and Africa. And it's New World only to one group on this one. And so it's a little European-centric to call it New World, Old World. So, okay, on to food. And new food crops to Europe. And there's two sort of kinds here. Brand new to Europe, they've never seen to them, or ones that are not new, but now they have new territories to grow them. So the big one here is the potato. This is the big one, followed by corn. And both of these added to the total calories consumed by Europeans and would lead to a healthier people, relatively healthy. The Europeans were notoriously unhygienic, and the world over lacks modern understandings of medicine, bacteria, and microbes. But, they're eating better. And it's going to lead to a population increase and will offset the population loss in Africa through the slave trade. And it benefits the poorest peasants the most, this one. The potato in particular, very easy to grow. It can grow in poor soils, harsh climates, and it's a nutritious crop. So it's very good adding to the calorie intake of the Europeans. For the not new but new places to grow, sugar is the key one. It's this crop that will become the basic economic model that will drive the Atlantic economy, and sugar, labor intensive, will drive the demand for cheap labor, and African slavery will become the option in this one. And wheat's important, but not so much yet. Its significance will really come in the 1800s. So, food coming in, calorie intake going up, healthier population, growing population in Europe. And gold and silver, a blessing for the Spanish. And gold and silver, long considered a medium of exchange. So it's just money, coming in for them. 180 tons of gold. This is sort of from 1500 to 1600s, and 16,000 tons of silver. 1/5 of this gets straight to the king and the queen. 1/5 is their tax on this, and this is offsetting the imbalance of trade that they have with Asia. And the crown, the government, saw this as a blessing, an absolute, gift from God. And they benefited the most from this gold and silver. They're going to use it for an aggressive, militaristic, deeply religious foreign policy, goal of destroying the Protestants. But was the gold and silver, in fact, more of a curse than a blessing? Well, yes, it sort of was a bit of a curse to them as well. Inflation coming in because you're expanding the money supply so fast, and it's the peasants and the laborers that are really going to get squeezed out of the economy. Things become so expensive that they don't access markets at all. They're really sort of squeezed out of it. And it's going to lead to this inflation, a high price of Spanish manufactured goods. Now, remember, this is before the Industrial Revolution, so manufactured goods are being made by artisans, craftsmen, sort of in the shop by hand, and they're in high demand in the American colonies in the 1600s, 1700s, but the Spanish ones are seen as unattractive. The people are going to seek British or Dutch or French manufactured goods, and because the Spanish ones are too expensive. And then the Spanish manufacturing and industry would then lag behind the rest of European countries for centuries in quality, quantity, and innovation, all of them not so good. And finally, just defending and transporting the metal, the gold and silver, will become costly and difficult. There's a lot of piracy, and the piracy is of other people, English, French, or others, and some of it's being done just on their own. Sometimes it's being encouraged by the English and the French and the Dutch. If you can't get the gold and silver yourself, well, just steal it. And the coastal fortifications and the navy are very much going to waste a lot of that 1/5 of tax that they're collecting. And in 1588, with the defeat of the Spanish Armada, it's really the beginning of a long decline of Spain and the long ascent of Britain. And I want to end on this. Actually, I just want to go back to the high price of Spanish manufacturing goods. This one here. With the other Europeans gaining wealth, then they could invest that wealth back into colonization efforts or into trading companies such as the British East India Company or the Dutch East India Company, or for exploration expeditions to the Americans. So this involved putting up a lot of money early as an investment, hoping for a bigger payoff later, and we would call this today capitalism. And that's going to take roots, especially in England and in the Netherlands, of using the wealth and investing it back into expeditions to make more wealth. And it's the English and the Dutch, and to lesser extents, but also the French, that are going to be on the rise and benefiting from the wealth coming into them and not into Spanish manufacturing. All right, so the defeat of the Spanish Armada, 1588, a turning point, and with any sort of turning point, you look at the before and the after. So before this, it's Spain and Portugal that are dominating the seas, especially the Atlantic Ocean, that are establishing colonies in Mexico and South America and benefiting from that, especially that silver and gold. Afterwards, with their defeat and their navy greatly weakened, that's when the French, the British, and the Dutch are able to establish successful colonies themselves and start participating in the expanding, lucrative Atlantic trade. And we'll look at that trade networks in the Atlantic in a later episode. So the 1588, big turning point, the Spanish in decline, and the British, the Dutch, the French on the ascent. All right, that concludes this lecture. Thank you very much for listening.